Hi there, I'm Woolly Wormhead and welcome to my channel. In today's tutorial, I'd like to talk to you about the circular cast on, also known as a pinhole cast on. Now, this is a really nifty technique for working center out in your knitting, or in my case, it will be used for working top down hats. So you'd start with this cast on and then you'd work them down. Now, one of the reasons why I really like it for starting top down hats is that it's the exact opposite of how you would close a bottom up hat. So in a bottom up hat, you start with the brim, you cast on, start with the brim, then you go into the body, then you do your crown shaping, and then you're left with a small number of stitches left, so 6 or 8 stitches. And the pattern would normally then instruct you to break the yarn, thread the yarn through those stitches, and draw it to close up the hole. So you draw the yarn through the stitches and you tighten it and it closes the hole. The circular cast on does the exact opposite of that. It actually puts those stitches onto the yarn tail so that you can then go on and work out. So you can use it in a center art project, but any kind. I recommend it for my top down hats, but it doesn't just have to be hats. All right. So let me switch to the overhead and show you how easy this is to do and give you a couple of tips to make sure that it goes smoothly for you. Okay, then to work this particular cast on, we need our yarn. I'm using Malabrigo Rios, which is a worsted, and a 4mm crochet hook. So you need your yarn and an appropriately sized crochet hook. And you'll need your needles to transfer to once you've worked the cast on, because we're going to do the cast on onto the hook. Now, to start, what we need to do is to wrap our yarn around our index finger with the yarn tail over this side. All right. This is going to form a ring and we're going to work the stitches around the ring. So where I was saying this is like breaking yarn and threading it through the remaining stitches of a bottom up hat and then drawing it and tighten it up to close. This bit of yarn here is like the yarn that you thread through your stitches. All right. And we're going to create the stitches around this ring. Now, the first few I'll do on my finger like this, and then I'll kind of take it off because it gets a little bit uncomfortable. You may find for you that it doesn't get uncomfortable at all, but this is how I prefer to do it. So the mechanism for creating the stitches is the same. The only thing I'm going to change is once I've made a few is I'm going to work it off my finger. All right, so let's get started. We put the yarn, we put the hook underneath the yarn that's around our finger. I'm anchoring it there so it doesn't get too loose. And we grab the working yarn and we pull it through underneath where the hook went. And then we go back over the top and we grab the yarn again and then we pull it through the loop that we had on the hook. And that's one stitch created. So let me show that again. Under into the ring, grab the working yarn, pull it through back under that ring. Then we go over the top, grab the working yarn, and we pull it through the loop that's on the crochet hook. That's 2 stitches created. Now at this point, I tend to take my finger out of the ring and work around the ring this way around because I'm not a natural crocheter and I find it uncomfortable to hold the hook and the ring that way. I'll still keep it anchored with one of my fingers as I'm doing here, but this opens up the space a little bit better for me to work. So I take it there. So let's do that again. Hook into the ring, grab the working yarn, pull it back under from through the ring. Then we go over the top to grab the working yarn, and then we pull that through. Now, if you're like me and not a natural crocheter, you can use your fingers to help you get the last bit of that stitch created. All right, that's not cheating. You're just doing what you need to do to get the job done. In through the ring, grab the working yarn, pull it back through the ring, over the top of the ring, and then pull that through to make the next stitch. Now, keep an eye on this yarn tail here, all right? Don't let it loosen up too much. This is what we're going to tighten the ring with once we are done. So I'm going to put on another 2 stitches into the ring, grab the working yarn, pull it through, up over the top, grab the working yarn. At this point, if you need to use your fingers to drop that loop over to finish the stitch, as I say, that's okay. Into the ring, grab the working yarn over the top, to go up the other side to make the second part of the stitch. Now, we have created 6 stitches. What we want to do is we want to transfer them to our DPNs. Now, at this point, it can be a little bit fiddly. You might find it easier to actually, rather than spread it across however many DPNs you're going to use in your project, just spread them across 2 because you are less likely to drop them. And just hold your DPNs parallel, because we all know that working on DPNs can feel a little bit like fighting with a hedgehog. And DPNs, especially when the stitches are loose like this and they're just freshly created, the DPNs are going to slip out. So you are now ready. If we're going to be joining in the round, you would then go on to knit this stitch here. But what I'm going to suggest you do, this yarn tail here is what tightens up the ring. So holding your DPNs firmly and keeping that center of the stitch there, you might need to hold the stitches a little bit, pull that, there it starts to go, and it tightens up and it closes that hole. Like you would do on a bottom up hat, you thread the yarn through, pull the yarn tail, and it tightens the hole, and the hole has gone already. Now, I suggest doing that straight away, or at least maybe after the first round. If this feels a little bit kind of like precarious, or you're a bit worried about losing your stitches until you put another round or 2 on them, then do your round or 2 and then tighten it. What I would say is don't get fully into the body of your knitting and then go, oh, I've got to tighten up that ring, because it actually gets harder to do when you've got more rows or rounds on your work. And then you are ready to go straight into knitting across, let's say, DPNs. Fighting with hedgehogs, honestly. I love DPNs, but they can be a little bit tricky. Whoop. Now, working across 2 for the first round or 2 is actually an awful lot easier. You're dealing with less needles, less chance of them dropping out, etc., etc. Now, especially if you're doing increases, you will then be able to move up to more DPNs as you need them. But that, in short, is how you work it. That yarn tail is what closed the cast on, and there it's all done for you. As I say, if you're working increased rounds, then you'll be able to move on to more DPNs and eventually onto circular needles. If you're somebody who wants to go into magic loop straight away, go for it. That's not something I'm comfortable doing, but that's if that's your preference for working, then yep, that's fine. All I would say is keep the number of needles to the minimum here so that you've got less places for your stitches to drop off, and close the ring as soon as you can to make sure that it does close nice and firmly. All right, so there you go. That's how to do the circular cast on. And there you go. That's the circular cast on. I did that cast on a little bit looser than I would normally do for a top of a hat. I did that looser so you could see what the stitches were actually doing as I was creating them. Which then meant, of course, as I transferred to the DPNs, bigger stitches, more chance of dropping them. If you're working to a regular gauge and you're not working loosely, you're going to reduce your chances of dropping any stitches. And as I say, work across 2 needles. Keep your number of DPNs or number of needles that you're working with at that starting point to a minimum until you've increased enough stitches or worked enough rounds so that your knitting's a little bit more substantial and isn't going to drop off the needles. All right. I actually prefer this as a way for starting any center art project because it's really nice and neat. It perfectly mirrors what happens in a bottom up hat. I like that kind of symmetry and things. But also, when I used to try a different cast on method and then just join it and then sew up the hole, it never used to look as neat. This is a really nice, neat way of doing it. Give it a go. It might take a little bit of practice to make sure that you get the right tension. Working out how you want to create your stitches, whether you keep that loop or the ring on your finger or you take it off and work around, that's up to you again. Give it a practice. We all have different knitting styles, so there isn't just going to be one way that works for everybody. But I'm hoping I've given you enough information for you to go and try it. All right. If you've liked this video, it's been helpful, please do the like, hype, subscribe thing. And I appreciate your support in that way as I grow my channel and help get my tutorials out to more knitters. All right. Okay. Until next time, happy knitting.